A little while ago we were talking about peer review and how peer review processes are managed in your journal. I'd like to take it on to the other side from an author's point of view, how to best navigate the peer review process. First, let's talk about what's the author's responsibility to make a paper well written to get through peer review. What substance needs to be there?
Well, first you have to get to peer review. And many papers, actually the majority of papers, are rejected before even going to peer review. And those papers that are rejected may not be bad papers, but they may not be a good fit for the journal. So they may be too specialized or too focused on one ethnic group, for example, because we're the International Journal of Clinical Practice and we want a broad scope of the papers that we select that would attract a broad readership. So getting to peer review would require a compelling story, and that could be a new finding or a new way of telling an old finding. Once a paper gets into peer review, actually that's a major accomplishment. And there, going through the peer review process will always be a win for the author, because even though their paper may not actually be accepted, it will generate some comments that allow them to improve their paper and perhaps get it published in another journal. So it is a win situation. I look at it that way. Once it gets past that hurdle and gets sent on to external peer review. Now, how to react to a peer review, to the peer review process and a decision? Well, a rejection, unfortunately, means rejection from that journal. But you can take from the recommendations things that will improve the paper, and that certainly should be paid attention to before resubmitting anywhere else. The biggest mistake a person can do is to ignore those suggestions or recommendations, because they will be the key to making the paper better enough for that next journal. Now, if the response is major revision, people sometimes take that as, oh, this is not good news. It's actually excellent news, because major revision means as long as you're able to make the changes that are requested, by and large your paper will be accepted. It's just going to take some work. Minor revisions, same thing. The revisions actually may not be so minor, and it may require quite a bit of work, but if you invest that time and energy, your paper will get accepted. The only time that a paper doesn't get accepted after a recommendation of major or minor revision is when the author decides not to bother to do those changes, or when they cannot make those changes in a satisfactory manner.
So one of the challenges to get a paper accepted is to make the appropriate case that this is good research and worthy of the journal. And all of that comes down to the cover letter, really, or the pre-submission inquiry. So taking for granted that the pre-submission inquiry has taken place and the journal has indicated that yes, this is something that we'd be interested in reviewing, what types of things should the author really include in the cover letter of the submission to state the case and to meet the norms of what the journal expects to be disclosed in the cover letter in addition to the manuscript itself?
Well, the cover letter should be an introduction as to why this research is important. And very importantly, why maybe that this contribution is unique. The last thing a journal wants is to publish something that kind of has been published elsewhere. So the uniqueness of the submission should be emphasized. Also very important in the cover letter, if the author or authors have anything else that's out there being considered for publication, or anything that has been published that is somewhat similar, that should be disclosed. Because that would be a very bad thing if through the review process it was discovered that something very similar has already been published by the authors themselves. That will lead to almost an automatic rejection. So it's very important to state up front and explicitly what else is out there under review and what has also been published using the same database or other work that the authors have already done. That said, the abstract is also very critical in the evaluation of the manuscript, and the abstract must be very clear about the numbers of patients involved in the, if it's a clinical trial, in the clinical trial, if it's a meta-analysis, number of studies, number of patients in the studies in total, and so on. The effect size should also be described in the abstract. The p-value alone is meaningless. We also need to know the effect size and how important clinically that result may be.
One of the things that authors are often confused about with respect to the cover letter is it is often asked to state 1 to 5 potential peer reviewers, names
Yes.
of people who could potentially peer review this material, and or state 1 to 5 authors or other people who are in the literature who should not be peer reviewing this material. Perhaps you can explore that a little bit as to, from your journal's perspective, what types of information would you like to receive from the author along with the submission package in these arrangements?
We make it a requirement now for all authors to submit the names of at least 3 people who are their preferred peer reviewers. Doesn't mean that we'll ask these peer reviewers to look at the paper, but we need those 3 just in case we need more peer reviewers. We also allow authors to state which people they would rather not peer review their papers, and this may be people who they know they don't get along with, or are competitors that have an axe to grind, and so on. So authors can indicate who they would rather not have peer review their papers. Now that too is optional for the journal to consider, and that we may very well still ask people who are leaders in their field who may be a non-preferred reviewer to review anyway, but we'll take the author's point of view into consideration when looking at the outcomes of these reviews. Now, it's very important that the peer reviewers that are being suggested are legitimate peer reviewers, that they're not friends or relatives of the author, or colleagues of the author, or co-authors on other papers of the author. They should truly be independent. And it's always very useful to know more details about the recommended reviewers, including their institutions and, of course, their emails.